So I want to make a quick pass at some really basic details with the snowman. Then I want to talk a little bit about box modeling or extruding geometry from existing polygons. So the first thing I'm going to do before I jump into some additional modeling is that I want to just add some real simple details to the environment. So I'll probably throw some buttons on the snowman, and I'll also throw a hat on top of my snowman. And for the hat, I'm going to get started with the cone. And the cone might seem like a strange choice at first because I don't want to make a witch. I want to make a snowman. But if we select the cone, and I'll just kind of zoom in here a little bit so we can see this a little bit more clearly. With the cone selected, if we go into the Attributes Manager with the Object tab, we can adjust the top radius of the hat. Okay, so we can kind of do some simple adjustments here. I'm going to do some real quick, just kind of modeling with the tools that I have here, and just making some real simple decisions about the size of things. Now, I don't need as much segmentation as I have inside the object, and this is a pretty easy place to lose some of the segmentation, but I may want to model this a bit, so I'm going to just reduce the height segments just a little bit, and then get back to the task of modifying this cone object. So because I can adjust the top and the bottom radius, it gives me a little bit of control. So I don't have to really deal with a cylinder object and have to model that. So I think that's pretty good. I'll come back and tweak this later, but I do want to get in the habit, I want to be disciplined about naming things. So I'm going to call this top of hat, and I'm going to introduce another object, which in this case, I'll probably experiment with a different object. I'm going to create a cylinder, and what I'm going to use the cylinder for is the rim of the hat. Now, you may have noticed that under the parametric primitives, there's a disk, and maybe we could have gotten away with the disk, but the disk is a two-dimensional object, whereas the cone is a three-dimensional object, so I can control some of the dimension of this thing a little bit more readily. So what I'm using now this time around is just these little control points that are embedded in parametric primitives. And if you see these control points, you can just roll your mouse right over that little dot, and you can just kind of interactively slide that around. So I like to kind of model things up and away in this case, and that's kind of the look I'm going for. Now that I have the rim and the hat, I think it's a little big, so I'll just kind of use these points here to kind of bring that down. And I feel like the cone of the hat is not exactly the shape that I want. So I'm going to rename my cylinder, and I'll call this rim of hat. And we have top of hat, and I'll just go through and refine this a little bit. Now, I'm fairly satisfied with that right now. That's a pretty decent looking hat. I'm going to select both of these objects, and remember, I can select both of these objects a couple different ways. I can click and drag inside the Object Manager, maybe. There we go. And select those two objects, or I can select one and shift-click another. At this point, I want to group these objects. I could go to the Object pull-down menu and choose Group Objects, but you'll notice here that I can also choose Alt-G. Which that's the way I'm going to do this. I'm going to Alt-G, I have a group, I'm going to call this group hat, and I'm going to do one last thing to my hat, and that is, well, two last things actually. I'm going to throw material on this hat. So I'm going to create a simple brown hat material, and the color of this material is going to be brown. Now you'll notice that I'm looking for the color channel here, and you'll notice that I have the reflectance channel selected. That's why it's giving me properties for reflectance. So I'm just going to move up to color. I'm going to choose the color, and you might notice that my color picker looks a little bit different from video to video. That's because I'm moving back and forth between Cinema 4D 16 and Cinema 4D 17. So we can, this is the Cinema 4D color picker layout. I kind of like this HSV slider, but you can change this to an RGB slider, and you can modify the look and feel of this. But what I'm looking to do is just, I want kind of a brown color. So I'm going to send this over towards orange, and then I'm going to reduce that, and that's probably the kind of material I'm going for, kind of a nice dark brown. And I'll say OK. I'm also going to turn the reflectance channel off. I don't want this reflecting too much, and I'm not really utilizing the reflectance channel properly yet. We'll take a look at that a bit later. So I have my brown hat material. I'm going to throw that on the hat object, and because I've placed that on the parent object, the children of that object inherit that material. So the only other thing that I think I want to do is I want to create another cylinder and to add a little band around my hat, just to have a little bit of detail. Now, rather than making a new cylinder and kind of positioning that into place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow the rim of the hat, and I'm going to choose to Command C, Command V, or copy and paste. And I'm just going to call this, I'll call this hat band. And I'm not sure, if I'm going to keep this, but I just want to see how this is going to look. So I'm moving this up just a bit. I'll bring this in, and actually now that I think about it, I probably want to do this with a cone object because I want to emulate that taper in the hat. But really what I want to do is just, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to grab that edge and tuck it in and just make that a little bit taller. And because I have a taper in the hat, it's going to be a little bit thicker at the bottom than it will at the top, and that's okay. I think for the level of detail that I'm working with, I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. And I'm just going to use that as an opportunity to kind of add a little detail to my snowman. So I'm just going to create a nice red color. And at this point, I'm keeping the names of my materials very, very general. So I'll just call this hat band. And I can always go back in and change this if the color's off. So I'm not spending too much time choosing the colors, because again, I'll do a pass later on after rendering to make sure that I have all the colors and all the details that I want. So I'm just going to drag and drop the hat band, and I want to add that to the hat group. And so what I'm looking for when I drag this is I'm looking to go over top of the hat, and I'm watching for that down arrow. I can see it, now I'll release, and I'm satisfied with the hat. One of the things about working in 3D is it's really easy to be very precise, particularly when you get the handle of these tools. And a lot of times when we're making stuff, it's the precision that's going to throw this thing off. There's a little bit of charm, a little bit of detail when things aren't quite right. Like in this case with the hat, the hat is sitting perfectly on top of the head, perfectly straight, perfectly aligned. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the rotation tool, make sure I have the parent hat object selected, and I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. I'll rotate it back a little bit. Now that kind of changes the way that it sits in the head of the snowman. Looks a little strange, so I'll just go to the move tool and kind of move that back. Now when I move this back, you can see that the top of the snowman head is kind of poking through this. I want to fix that. I don't want to see that in the render. In fact, I'll give that a quick render so you can see that a little bit more clearly. You can see the way I position the hat. It's just not what I want to do. So I'm going to lift that hat up a little bit just until that head disappears. And that's kind of what I'm going for. I really want this hat to sit lower, but you can see as I push that down lower, it's really poking the head through. So this might make a case to where I want a larger hat, or at least a larger top part of the hat. So maybe I'll go in and correct that really quickly. The hat band's going to need to be bigger, so I'll make that much bigger for now. And I'll go into the top hat, and I'll just kind of pull this out. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for these polygons of the snowman head to disappear. There we go. Pretty happy with that. Feels a little bit, kind of like a big clunky hat, but again, I'm going to come back and make a pass at that later. I am going to open up the top of it more and really exaggerate that. That's pretty good for now. Okay, so there's just a real simple detail. I'll throw some buttons on the front of my snowman as well, but the big change that I want to make right now is I need to add some arms to the snowman. Now, adding the arms is going to be something that it's going to take a little practice. I'm going to choose to use this box modeling technique, and this is a fairly common technique with adding geometry to existing polygons. And to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my snowman. I'm going to choose File Save. And not a bad idea to do File Save Incremental. And I'm going to create just a new temporary document to demonstrate this, a new temporary project file. I'm not going to save this. This is kind of a little sandbox place where I'm experimenting with a set of tools outside of my project so that when I go back to implement this set of tools, I have a little bit of experience with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cube and I'm going to add segmentation. So I'm going to go to make sure the cube is selected. I'm going to go to the Attributes Manager, make sure that the Object tab is selected. And I'm going to add 3 segments to X, Y, and Z. So I'm just going to key in the values, hit the Tab key to move through those fields. Now, because I'm in a new document or a new project, I should see the segmentation, but I don't. And that's because by default, our display is not showing a line view. So I'm just going to turn that on to display lines. Okay. Now you can see the segmentation of this cube. We have Z segmentation moving back in the direction of the Z axis, and we have X segmentation, and it's a 3 by 3, so it kind of looks like almost like a Rubik's Cube kind of thing. Okay, so I have this cube. I could modify the shape of it, scale it around, but what I'm most interested in doing right now is just exploring the extrusion tool. Okay, and the extrusion tool is going to give me the ability to add additional geometry to this object. And so the way that this is going to work is I need to convert my parametric object, my cube, to an editable polygon object. And I can do that a couple different ways. From the previous presentation, as long as we have this object selected, we can just click on this icon over here. In addition to that, we can use the C key, which is what I'm going to choose to do. I'm going to use C. Now at this point, this allows me to go into and select the components of this object, and what I'm most interested in are the polygon objects. So I'm going to go to the polygon selection tool here, or the component mode. I'm going to make sure that I have the live selection tool selected, and at this point I can click and select different polygons, just like we did the points in the previous presentation. Now once I have this polygon face selected, I could move these polygons around just like we did with the caret, or I can move the points around. But what I want to do is I want to actually add some geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under the Mesh drop-down menu, and I'm going to look through a couple of these menus. So I'll notice that I have a conversion menu, a commands menu, and this creation tool. Now, what I'm most interested in is somewhere hiding in here is the extrude tool. Okay, now I'm under Mesh, Create Tools, and I'm looking for Extrude, not Extrude Inner, not just yet, but Extrude. One of the things about the Cinema 4D interface, which is very useful, there's a couple of things. One, if we want to kind of focus on this menu for a bit, rather than digging through this menu, I could just tear off this tab, and I can do that by at the top of the drop-down menu. If I click on that, you can see that that temporarily peels that panel off. So if I feel like I'm going to be spending time in this panel, not a bad idea to peel it off and leave it up. Alternatively, if I go up under this same menu and I go to Mesh, Create Tools, you'll notice there's a quick key combination that's being listed here, and there's a bunch of letters. And if I look at Extrude, it says M, title, T. That little squiggly is a title key. So MT, and then it has a comma, D, and that might seem like, require a little decoding here, but really what that says is that the D key will bring up the extrude tool, and also M followed by T. So we have these sub-menus in Cinema 4D. And for example, if I tap the M key, we get this little menu that pops up, and as soon as I move my mouse, it disappears. But if I hit the M key, it basically brings up a bunch of tools for modeling. And if I look through that list and identify the extrude, which is at letter T, that means that now if I press the T key, that will bring up extrude. Okay, so I have a couple of different options here. I can go to Mesh, Create, and then choose to click on the extrude tool, or just press the D key or MT. Okay, now I don't want to overwhelm you with options, but it is important to start to understand how to navigate the space and find these tools quickly so that we're not digging through menus all the time. And another really great way to bring up some basic modeling tools is to modify the layout of Cinema 4D. And at this point, we've been looking primarily at the startup layout. So if you look up here in the top right-hand corner of Cinema 4D, you'll see there's a layout field. And there's a drop-down menu, and this will allow us to change our default layout. And it's really valuable sometimes to change our layout to focus on just the tools that we need. So in this case, if we go up under the starting layout and choose modeling, what happens is that the perspective viewport kind of becomes a little bit more important inside of our scene. We kind of zoom in. But down at the bottom here, now we have some really common modeling tools. And you'll notice that I have the extrude tool selected. So the extrude icon is down here. Just to the left of that is the bevel tool, and to the right of it is the inner extrude tool. We want just the standard extrude tool. So again, I got a couple of different methods to work. I'm working in the model view right now, and if I want to, I can go back to startup, where everything looks the way it has for the entire project. I'm going to jump back into that modeling layout. I'm going to choose the extrude tool, and now at this point, when I have the extrude tool, because I don't have any polygons selected, the first thing that's happening is it's highlighting a polygon. So I'll just click on that polygon. Okay, now alternatively, if I had the live select tool selected and I had a polygon selected, and I go to the extrude tool, that polygon remains selected. Now, the way that the extrude tool works, and in fact most tools when we're in the component mode of Cinema 4D, the way this works is that with a polygon selected, what I want to do is I want to click and drag in the negative space of my viewport, and if I drag to the right, you can see that I extrude out. And if I drag to the left, you can see that I extrude in the opposite direction. So I'm just dragging left and right. Okay, but it's important that we don't select these axes in this point. I'll just Command Z to undo, because what we're doing when we're extruding, you'll notice, is that we're actually adding geometry, or we're adding segmentation based on the object that we have selected. So in other words, if I just roll over the axis and I drag, what I'm doing is I'm moving that polygon. Okay, extruding is not moving the polygon. What extruding is doing, and I'll just click and drag to the right, extruding is actually extending that polygon out and generating more geometry. To demonstrate this point, I'll release the mouse, I'll click and drag to the right again, and now you see that I have a second segment. So I've created additional geometry. So every time I click and drag with the extrusion tool selected, that generates more geometry. Okay? Now, once I generate that geometry, I could move it around just like I do other components. Extruding content is very important because we're modifying the amount of information that's inside this model. So let me just select this top polygon, and I'll click and drag to the left. And in this case, I'm extruding inside or into the object. It's a standard extrusion. It's just extruding in the opposite direction of what I've been extruding. When it comes to extruding polygons, the idea of a polygon is that it has what's called a normal direction, and that's typically in the direction of Z. So it's just kind of perpendicular to its surface. We'll look at the details of this a bit later when we take a deeper dive into modeling, but I'm just going to grab a couple of different polygons here, and I'll just extrude that out. So you can see how I'm just really kind of changing the structure of this object. Okay, so I can just select a polygon, try that again, select a new polygon, and click and drag to the right and extrude it. So I'd recommend that you experiment with this extrusion method inside a standalone project, something disposable, so that you can really kind of play with this. So I'm going to delete this object, and just for really quick review, I'm going to reset all of my viewports here to startup. So real quick review, I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to bump up that cube segmentation to 3 according to all 3 axes. I'm going to make that cube editable, and once it's editable, not edible, I don't want to eat the cube, I want to modify it. I'm going to go to the live select tool, make sure that I'm in polygon mode, and I'll select some polygons. At this point I need to get the extrude tool, and I'll leave it up to you which method you choose to use. I'm going to use the D key, but alternatively you can go to Mesh, Create Tools, and choose it from that menu, or we can modify our layout to go into modeling mode and then we're just looking down here at this tool. As a side note, when we leave our mouse, if we hover over a tool long enough, it'll give us a little tooltip pop-up along with the shortcuts. In addition to that, if you look down here at the very bottom of the Cinema 4D window, as I roll around on these tools, you'll see that it's describing what the tool is there. So if you need a little reminder of what it is, we're looking for the extrude tool. I'm going to tap the D key, and I'm just going to click and drag to the right. Now remember, I'm avoiding these axes. Okay, so I'm not dragging because that would just default to move. That's not extruding. I'll just extrude this top face, okay, and kind of move that away. So you can see I can make some really kind of quick and simple geometry. This is going to have pretty powerful implications for us. In the immediate future, we're going to use this technique to build some branch arms for our snowman. But we'll do that in the next presentation. So just play around with this inside its own document, experiment with it. That way we won't, modify or break any of our hard work in our snowman scene. I'm just going to close this without saving. That takes me back to my snowman. And in the next presentation, we'll use this technique of extrusion. We'll extrude we'll box model a simple branch to use for our snowman arms. But we'll do that in the next presentation.